Alright. Alright, let's do this. I can do this. Alright. Alright. Focus. Maintain. Alright. Rodney pulled into the student parking lot in his beat-up, rusted-out 2003 Nissan Sentra. Guess what the author drives? He was late. Really late. And he could pile all the fucks he gave into a thimble. He was a class clown, not a mathlete. And today was the day of what would be his greatest comedic performance ever. He pulled into a clearly marked handicapped space. Come on, you know you all want to. Itself the lone open spot among a packed parking lot. 'Cause you know it always is. Killed the engine and tossed his keys onto the passenger side. He stepped out of the vehicle, opened the back door, emerging again with a dirty, grease-stained gym bag. It'd be lunch soon. He was just in time. He headed into the school without so much as closing the door to his car. The halls of Blenny Bruce High were like those of any typical suburban American high school. They were adequately maintained and brightly lit, festooned with block after block of blue student lockers and occasional graffiti. Oh, goddamn, why am I yawning? Come on, maintain. Rodney had to admit, he was kind of going to miss this place. Nevertheless, today was the day of his big break, and he was never coming back again. He checked his watch. It was 11:57, just 3 minutes till the lunch bell. Then his performance would begin. Then his performance could begin. He stood there, waiting, starting to unzip the gym bag a bit when he heard a shrill voice from behind him. "Mr. Herrera! Late again, I see!" He didn't even need to turn to see her. It was that shriveled old prune Mrs. Harrison, the vice principal. She hated him, and the feeling was very much mutual. She felt he was a slacker who was just wasting the school's time. Well, he was about to show her. His big breakout performance was today.
Why you even bothered to show up at all is beyond me, and I want you to know that's a general assessment.
Rodney reached into the bag. He might have a pie or two for everyone else in the name of comedy, but this one... Oh, Jesus. I knew it. But this one was just a treat for him.
I will not, however, have you standing in my halls during class time, you little delinquent.
A thunderous boom rang out, and the words ceased immediately. Rodney was holding a smoking 9mm pistol and sporting a sardonic grin on his face. Mrs. Harrison now sported a hole starting at her forehead and ending in a jagged bloody exit wound at the back of her skull. She made a small gurgling noise, rocked a bit, and dropped like a stone. He heard a sound overhead. He jumped a bit, wondering if he'd already been made. Instead, it was the thing he'd planned and hoped for, the lunch period bell. The hallways were a chaotic mess of students pouring out of the classrooms, destined for lockers and then a cafeteria. Nobody was in any particular rush. Rodney had picked Salisbury steak day. Nobody's ever in a hurry for Salisbury steak.
Guess what cafeteria food the author hates?
The largely oblivious mass of students had yet to particularly take notice of their class clown in the body of the vice principal lying by the exit. He took advantage of the inattention of the students to unzip the gym bag and reach for the AR-15 inside. You ever heard that? Oh, He overheard a couple of voices in the hall, finally noticing something amiss with a collapsed body on the ground. It mattered little. He leveled the AR-15 to the approximate height of center mass for most bodies in the crowd, and began firing round after round into the crowd of students. A few seconds of confusion fell over them before realization set in, and then panic. The hallways became a flood of screams, and students stampeded every which way they could to get away from Rodney. Classrooms, once deserted, were now serving as refuges from the lunatic, gunning down anyone and everyone in the hall. Rodney fired into the fleeing masses. He'd hit at least 4 before the general panic set in, and another 3 caught rounds in the back, fleeing from him in terror. Rodney didn't hate all the classes here. He found metal shop a rather fun and useful course. He learned all sorts of neat things there, though the most relevant of them in his current situation was that he'd used the tools there over the past few weeks to machine out some high-capacity magazines. He slapped another 60-round magazine into his weapon and stepped into room 115. He'd seen a few students dive in there for cover, and bald, boring Mr. Cutler was bound to still be in there. I knew this. He scanned the room, but on first glance couldn't see anyone. Then he saw a round globe of glistening, shiny, bald head poke out from the side of the desk. Yep, they were hiding behind desks. Rodney didn't even bother to look behind the thing. He just put a dozen or so rounds through it. It's not like teachers' desks were made of Kevlar or anything. Sure enough, Cutler rolled out from behind it, coughing up blood. Rodney looked around the room and could see evidence of about a dozen students hiding behind desks. He didn't bother doing much of a search with them either. He simply fired at desk after desk until the rifle was empty. Here and there he saw bodies slump out from behind their cover. He figured it was good enough. Amidst his shooting, reloading, and just the general rush of adrenaline, Rodney had missed something. The PA was now instructing students to head for cover in the rooms and teachers to secure the doors. Damn, he had to applaud their response time. Still, he was basically a walking god at this point and wasn't about to be stopped by a few doors. He headed over to room 117. The thing was locked down tight. He put a shot into the doorknob, but aside from tearing the metal apart, the door was still locked. He shot it again, but hit a surface the slug couldn't penetrate, and so it went ricocheting around the hallway. Rodney couldn't take a risk like that, yeah? Rodney couldn't take a risk like that again, especially since he'd have his audience there soon enough. He gave a firm kick to the door, and when it failed to dislodge, he gave up. Room 117 had won this round, it seemed. Most of the remaining Room 117 had won this round, and it seemed most of the remaining classrooms were like that. He worried that his little setup here was ending too soon when he hit upon it. The bathrooms! He kicked the door to the women's room open. He'd felt some resistance when forcing it open, and looking at the floor, saw a girl laying on her back, cowering in terror. She had attempted to hold the door closed, but hadn't been expecting the force of the kick that toppled her. He double-tapped her with the 9mm and proceeded to check the stalls. They were empty. So he left and headed over to the men's room. The door opened effortlessly, and nobody appeared to be inside. He checked the stall doors. He kicked the first one open, but it was empty. He kicked the second of the 3 doors, and there sat a scrawny young freshman who had urinated himself. He mused that maybe he'd picked the perfect spot for that, and then put a 9mm round straight through the kid's heart. Rodney knew there wasn't an awful lot of time left before the audience was set to show up. With most of the doors closed and other bathrooms too far away, he was at a bit of a loss as to where to proceed next. He strolled over by the office, only to get the answer to his quandary. There was the portly, annoying principal of the place, Mr. Tomlin. He was fumbling with the keys to the office, having just completed the last security check before heading in to lock himself down. This was perfect. Tomlin saw him, dropped his keys, and began to run as fast as his fat, stubby little legs would carry him. Rodney had a special treat for this very moment. He reached into the gym bag and withdrew a bayonet. He fixed it to the special lugs he'd attached to the AR-15 in preparation for today and charged down the hall after Mr. Tomlin. The fat middle-aged principal was no match in a foot race with even a heavily encumbered high school student. Rodney got within range and sliced at the principal's neck with everything he had. The deep gash sprayed blood everywhere, coating Rodney with a fine red mist. Tomlin clutched his neck and stumbled into the wall. Turning to face the boy, Rodney thrust the bayonet deep into that man's fat gut, and then again into his chest. Blood spilled out of the man's mouth and his breathing ceased. Rodney could hear the sirens outside. This was it. His audience had arrived at long last. He tossed the gym bag to the side and headed out. He gingerly pushed the exit door open. He gingerly pushed the exit door open and faced the parking lot. The glare of the noontime sun flooded his vision, and it was impossible to see exactly what was out there. He squinted hard and put a hand over his head to shield his eyes. As they adjusted, it all came into view. There stood every cop in the city, many from the surrounding communities, and a state police SWAT team, and a state police SWAT unit. Unit. Okay. It was a sellout crowd. This was his big break. He took a few steps forward only to be met with screams of, "Stay right where you are!" He was a bit taken aback, but realized the cops were staring at that rifle he was still holding absent-mindedly. He tossed it to the side and took several more steps forward. The police repeated their instruction. Rodney stopped walking, and a brief moment of silence fell over the entire parking lot. As they say, timing is everything in comedy. The moment was now. He spread his arms out and shouted, "The aristocrats!" Nailed it.